Hi, welcome to the Kohl's Color Training for single dyes and cross dyes. Before we begin, I just want to say congratulations on the expansion of your color certification. Your dedication and expertise are just two of the reasons you have been granted the expansion. We look forward to continuing our partnership with you. Before we begin, we understand that there may be some uncertainty or hesitation in taking on these submit types. Please know that we have complete confidence in your skills and abilities, and we know that you will be successful in this. So let's begin. Reviewing a single dye lab dip is essentially very similar to reviewing a solid. But before you begin to do so, it's important to remember the fundamentals of Kohl's color review. So one, make sure that you're using the correct light source. Make sure that you have the correct physical color standards that are indicated on the submit and or artwork. You're going to remove the submits from the form, and you'll evaluate the hue, chroma, and value of each lab dip using the moderators that we have taught you previously. Keeping all of these things in mind will be key to reviewing single dyes and cross dyes and to the success of the ownership. So let's begin with just reviewing a few samples of single dyes, lab dips, and single dye bulks. So the primary goal when reviewing a single dye is to ensure that you get a representation of the color standard. Obviously, due to the dyeing techniques, you will never get an exact match, and that is not the expectation. But we want to be able to focus on the key color of the single dye. So as you would with any submit, you're going to review all lab dip options. You're going to try to locate the closest lab dip in regards to its hue. And you'll want to determine if it's acceptable within our ranges of tolerance or if it needs to be improved based on our levels of acceptability, just as you would for a solid lab dip or bulk. So in single dyes, it is normal to see a larger variance in the lightness and the darkness. But really, like I said, we want to focus on that hue, and then we can expand the tolerance as far as if it's too light or too dark. So we'll work through that in this example here. So as you can see, we have the color standard on the left, just as we normally would, and the single dye lab dip on the right. So this was the closest option in this particular submit. And as you can see, if you try to focus on the blue color itself within the single dye lab dip, you'll see that it's relatively close in hue. They both cast to the red side. So this would be an example of a single dye lab dip that I would find within acceptable tolerance. So again, you want to really focus on the hue here, and then we can expand and possibly provide a wider tolerance when it comes to the lightness and the darkness of the color or the brightness and the dullness. You will also see in single dyes that they do tend to be on the duller side due to the dye technique and the fabrications that are used. So when reviewing the single dye bulk, just as you would in any other submit types, you're going to use the approved single dye lab dip as your standard for acceptability. So you're simply going to review the bulk submit next to your lab dip and determine if it matches. If it does, then you can approve the bulk for color. If you see variances, that's obviously when you will need to reject it and determine comments for improvements. So in this example here, we have the approved lab dip on the left and the bulk on the right. Now you may notice some difference in appearance, and that is typical. However, what you really, again, want to focus on is that hue, making sure that they are casting to the same color. As you can see here, the lab dip looks to be a little bit more on the green side, whereas the bulk may be leaning a little bit more red. So in this case, I would probably reject it and work on improving that hue a little bit more. It looks to be the same as far as the value and the chroma. So here's another example of reviewing a single dye lab dip. This is on a different substrate than the previous, so you can see a little bit more of that texture effect in this one a little bit more. This was an approved lab dip for the single dye. As you can see again, looking and focusing on that gray color, it's a great representation of the color standard in regards to the hue, in regards to the darkness. So we would approve this. And then in reviewing the book compared to the approved lab dip, I would again approve this. I think the level of darkness is equal, and I do believe that the hue is comparable in both and within an acceptable tolerance. So those are just a few examples of how to review single dye lab dips and bulks. As you go through your correlation and practice, you will see different variances and different levels of acceptability. This is really just to kind of get you started on how to review them and what to look for. So let's move on to cross dyes. So reviewing a cross dye lab dip is very much like reviewing a single dye lab dip. However, instead of one color, there are multiple. So again, due to the dye techniques used, a wider tolerance may be needed. Both colors of the cross dye lab dip should be indicated on the submit form. You'll probably notice a main color associated to the submits, and then somewhere within the comments, you'll find the secondary color. So you want to make sure that you have the correct color standards for both of the colors that you need to review, because you will be commenting on both of them. So here are a few examples of some cross dye lab dips. So you'll want to remove all of the lab dips from the submit form. One suggestion that we use when reviewing here is to start with the darker of the two color standards, as it's easier to identify. So in this case, I would start by reviewing the navy color and then go to the lighter green color. So you'll want to review each lab dip compared to both color standards. And once you find that closest option where both colors are represented well, you will want to determine, again, focusing on the hue, if it is within our acceptable tolerance level or if it needs improvement. You also, again, want to take into account the lightness and the darkness and the chroma. You will need to make approval or rejection comments on each color. So let's look at the first set of color standards on the left. So we'll start with the navy. Here you can see that, the navy is represented well. I actually like the photo in the middle more as a lab dip option. And you can see that the hue on the photo in the middle is a little bit more to the red side, which is represented more towards the color standard. So when you go to add in the second color, the light green color, again, these colors are not going to be 100% accurate because of the dye techniques and the construction. So, there is going to be a wider tolerance used here. However, that being said, the lighter green option looks to be a little dull in the lab dip and a little bit more on the blue side. So in this case here, in the photo on the far right, looking at both color standards, I would probably reject this lab dip. For the light green color, I would say that it is slightly too light, slightly too dull, and slightly too blue. And in this case, I would actually approve the navy color. You can approve one color and reject the other color. So overall, though, this would be rejected. As in the case with a solid lab dip or a single dye lab dip, once you do have an approval and you get the bulk submit in, you will review that bulk compared to the approved lab dip. In this case here, the bulk seems to be a little bit lighter, but I definitely think it is within acceptability and within our tolerance. So in this case, I would approve this bulk compared to the approved lab dip. Here is a second cross-dye lab dip for an example. So again, we're going to start with the darker of the color standards. Here, it doesn't seem that that darker color is the focal point in this particular lab dip option. However, it was the closest. So in this case, I would probably reject the darker green, stating that it's moderately too light. Moving on to the second color standard, again, it just doesn't seem as bright. It seems pretty dull and light, and it seems to be more on the bluer side. It needs to be more yellow and bright. So in this case, both colors are rejected, and I'm going to provide comments for improvements. Once we got that approved lab dip, the vendor proceeded to bulk, and we were able to make the approval based on this below image. So as you can see, the approved lab dip on the left and the bulk on the right are well within tolerance to each other. So this we would approve. I know this was a quick training session, but really, like I said before, your key fundamentals that you learned in the original certification training program are going to be what you'll utilize when reviewing single die lab dips and cross die lab dips and bulks. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or the MR colorist at Kohl's.com, and we will continue to guide you through this. We will be here with you every step of the way. And again, we have complete confidence in your abilities. Thank you, and let us know if you have any questions.